Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Angel Saxena. I'm a director of photography and DI colorist based in Mumbai, India. In this episode, we are going to continue from where we have left in the previous one. We didn't discuss the timeline panel in general in the last video because I wanted to keep it for this special video. In this one, I'm going to tell you what things to keep in mind while making your first ever timeline, how to keep this whole process non-destructive so that you can come back to your timelines, make changes, and so on. We're going to also have a look at the user interface of the timeline panel. So let's go ahead to the computer and start it without any further delay. Okay, so I have a new project here. We want to create a timeline. There is a very simple way of doing it, but it is not recommended at all. I will show you in a second why. But first, let's inspect what the footage is. So, on the icon here, you will see an information button. When you click on it, you will see that it is 1920 by 1080p and it's at 25 fps. Let's also see what the project settings are. So when you go to this bottom right corner settings icon, you will see that it is set at 4K and 23.976. So as you can see, both the resolution and the frame rate is different for the project and for my file, which I want to edit obviously. Well, what happens if I drag and drop any footage from my media to this timeline layout? It will automatically create a timeline. Here you go. I don't want to keep it here. We will organize it to the timelines folder, but not now. Let's see what happens to the project. As you can see, it's still at 4K. It has grayed out my FPS option at 23.976. My footage is 25. It has graded out to 23.976, which is, something wrong is happening. This is my playback frame rate. It is not the same as the timeline frame rate. The playback frame rate dictates what frame rate I am going to see on my monitor, but not in the export. Right. What happens if I want to deliver this project now? When I go to the deliver tab, I will see that my project frame rate is at 23.976. I can change it to 24 and 29.97. But there is no option for 25 fps. So what happened to my 25 fps? Let's go back to the edit panel. In it, the timeline that it created, you can differentiate it by the icon. As you can see, the video icon is different and the timeline icon is different. When you right click on it and go to these timeline settings, you will see that it grayed out both the resolution and the frame rate at 23.976. So it means whatever your project setting was at the beginning of a new project before making the first timeline, that will be your default setting if you choose to drag and create a timeline. So we don't want that. We can change it, however, by unclicking this use project settings tab. Now you can change the resolution, but still your FPS is logged on. Alright, so the best way of doing this, let's delete this timeline that we created accidentally. Let's right click on it, on timelines, create a new timeline. Before anything, let's click off this use project settings. Now everything is going to be under our control. We can rename it because it's the first timeline. Let's rename it 01 so that it's named sequentially. Then underscore, let's give it a version, underscore the date, and let's give it a time as well. Okay. Now in the format, you can see the resolution. Let's make it to 1080p, which is what my footage is at. Let's make it 25 fps, which is what my footage is at. You can go from 16 to 120 fps. Let's hit create. Now, when the timeline is created, let's drag and drop it to the timelines folder, which is where it's supposed to be organized. To check if the timeline is loaded or not, click on this button and press this first icon, which will show you all the timelines that are open. Of course, you can have multiple of them open. You can copy paste items from each other. For now, you can see that the timeline that we just created is now turned on. Let's drag and drop these two clips onto it. And now let's see if the timeline settings are changeable. You can see that although the 25 fps frame rate is locked, but you can change the resolution however. Now let's see what the project settings are at now. When you go to the setting, you will see that it remained unchanged this time. So essentially what we have done is we have bypassed this whole project settings. So now it doesn't matter what timeline resolution you have here, what frame rate you have here, because we are dictating it through the timeline itself. Now, of course, if you want to create different FPS timelines and different resolution timelines in one project, you can do so by just making new timelines. And whenever you are going to deliver it, for example, let's go to the deliver tab. You can see that the frame rate is now 25. It's kind of logged at 25, but let's create another timeline. Let's check this off. Let's rename it to 02 version 2 and let's make a 60 fps timeline. In the format, let's select 1080p HD and give it 60 fps. When I create it and when I double click on it so that this timeline is now enabled, let's drag and drop some footage, and as you can see now, the timeline will still be 60 fps. And when I go to deliver, you will see that the 60 fps frame rate is now enabled. So this is how you can create multiple resolution and multiple frame rate timelines in one single project. You don't have to make different projects for the same thing. Now let's switch to a project where I have edited a few clips. This is the last video I did and that you must have watched by now. If you haven't, I encourage you to watch that first because it explains the other parts of the user interface. To make the timeline smaller or bigger, you can use this slider. You can zoom out all the way or you can zoom in all the way to individual frame rates. To make it fit to this whole area, you can press Shift and Z together. That will make it fit to the screen. There is another way of doing so. I have actually made some keyboard customizations and I have set it to the plus and minus button on my keyboard. That does the same thing as this slider, but it's just a little bit easier. This I have actually taken from my days with Adobe Premiere. The timeline works in tracks. We have video tracks. As you can see, I have used 3 tracks for my video and 2 tracks only for my audio. Now you can make these tracks bigger by holding on to Shift and scrolling. You can see that it's making it bigger, but it's affecting all of the tracks together. To affect only one track, I can hover around and when I see this icon, I can just drag it to make only the track 2 bigger. Similarly, I can do that for audio as well. Similarly, we can control all the audio tracks by holding on to Shift and scrolling. Right. When I press Alt and when I scroll, it will zoom in and zoom out. So that's another way of making your timeline go big or small. I can hold control and when I scroll, it will just navigate me through the timeline. So instead of sliding it with this, I can just hold on to control and do the scroll. Alright, now in my clips, I can see that there is a playhead up top and I can see the frames and the time code also. I can hold this playhead and move it to go to different clips, or I can just click anywhere to go. But to affect any clip, I need to click on it. I am not going to teach how to edit in this video, otherwise the scope will be too big. But let's see a few more buttons. So this button is for playing your footage. This button is for stopping your footage. This button is for looping your footage. For example, I make this selection with I and O on the timeline. Let's hit play. And as you see, when I go till the end, it will loop it back. So this loop button does that. I can make selections, as you saw on my timeline. These selections are done for, well, looping, It is useful for pasting your clips when you want to paste it at a certain point in your timeline. It's also the marking for your export later on. All right. Now we have some more buttons here, but these functions are not very useful for this basic tutorial. So let's skip that. This is for animation. These are animation points. What else do you need to learn? Yeah, of course, you can switch between different timelines, and you can enable or disable this option by clicking on this button and pressing this one. Alright, so that's how you enable this. We also see this muting option or reducing your volume. This will not actually affect the volume of your project, right? But this will affect your playback. Now, as you can see that there are some buttons over here as well. Let's go by them one by one. Let's make the video track one big. Now you can see that there is a lock track option. Pressing that will lock every video clip on track one. You won't be able to drag it, you won't be able to delete it or anything. Now we have this disable video track function. It is basically the equivalent of muting an audio track. So if I do that, it will hide all the video tracks from this layer. As you see, it is disabled right now. You can also do that by clicking on any footage and pressing D. When you press D, it disables that footage. When you press D again, it enables that footage. You can do the same with audio, as you can see. So this is how you navigate with your timeline panel. One more thing before we end this session is how to duplicate a timeline. Suppose you're working on this project for too long and you want to make a backup. You can just press Control. You can select any timeline. You can just press Control C and Control V. That will duplicate it. And when you go on double clicking the timeline, you will see that it has a copy text at the very end. So let's delete that and let's make sure to make it a new proper version and have the right date on it, have the right time on it. Let's press enter, and when you double click on it, you will see that a new proper version, a proper duplicate of that timeline is made now. So this backs up your process and you can always go back to the previous version whenever you want to. Alright, so this is it for this video. We'll continue it in the next upload. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.